Thank you very much.
All right, Senator Barrasso.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations on your nomination. Thank you for taking time to visit with me. I have a couple of questions about the work you've done on behalf of the National Parks Conservation Association, known as the NPCA. You've been a member of the board since 2004. You currently serve as vice chair of the board. You've testified twice before Congress on behalf of the organization. And the paperwork that you submitted to this committee explains that you have lobbied the federal government on behalf of the organization. The NPCA advocates on behalf of the National Park Service. It also sues the federal government in support of policies that put people in Wyoming and across America out of work. It has sued the federal government to shut down coal-fired power plants, to end coal production, to block oil and gas production, and has fought uranium production. Now, since you have been a member of the board, your organization has sued the federal government a minimum of 59 times. Worst of all, NPCA uses taxpayer dollars to fund the lawsuits, taxpayer dollars that are putting Americans out of work. It's unsettling to many that you have a fundamental conflict of interest that when it comes to leading the Department of Interior, because many of these 59 lawsuits that your organization has filed against the government are still pending. And for this reason, I would ask that if confirmed, you recuse yourself from implementing any of the legal settlements which NPCA has been a party to at any time since 2004, recuse yourself from participating in any ongoing settlement negotiations which NPCA is a party to, and recuse yourself from participating in any future settlement negotiations which NPCA is a party to. Well, will you do that?
Senator, first, I am one of roughly 30 board members on the NPCA board. I have nothing to do with their litigation strategy. I play no role in anything that they may do around litigation. There's only one board member that's actually engaged in that, and that is a litigation liaison.
Well, you're vice chair of the board. You've had an active role in the organization. So is your answer no, you will not recuse yourself, or yes, you will recuse yourself?
Senator, to the extent that there are issues that come before the Department of Interior that have had an engagement with NPCA through a lawsuit, the first step I would make would be to the appropriate ethics officials within the department to determine what an appropriate scope of my involvement would be.
I will also ask, if confirmed, would you promptly disclose to the public all payments made using taxpayer dollars to individuals and entities that sue the Interior Department? And this goes beyond the organization of which you've been vice chair. There are numbers of suits that have filed. Taxpayers have not had a good accounting of that. So I'm asking if you would disclose to the public payments made using taxpayer dollars. Will you agree to do that?
Senator, I'm not aware of what the appropriate disclosure requirements are or aren't, nor what payments you're referring to, whether it's a repayment of legal fees. So I would have to work with the department to look into the request.
It seems to me there hasn't been the transparency that's been promised by the administration when it comes to these settlements. NPCA, the organization you've been vice chair, has weighed in on a number of pending rulings at the department, and we talked earlier about, or you spoke earlier about fracking. Well, your organization has weighed in on the BLM's hydraulic fracturing rule. Many of us are concerned that the BLM's rule will push oil and gas production off federal public lands, off Indian lands, costing public land states like mine and others here on the committee, and costing our Indian tribes thousands of jobs, millions of dollars of revenue. It is unsettling to many that NPCA has called on the BLM to dramatically expand the scope of that rule, costing even more jobs. Your organization has gone so far as to call on the BLM to make it even harder to explore for American energy. And NPCA has also weighed in on the Office of Surface Mining's stream protection rule, a rule which would shut down coal production in much of the country, and you've discussed that with Senator Manchin. So given your leadership at NPCA, many believe you have a fundamental conflict when it comes to overseeing any pending rulemaking in which your organization has participated. So again, if confirmed, will you recuse yourself from all pending rulemakings in which NPCA, the organization that you're vice chair of, has participated?
Senator, I'm not aware of either of the two reference the issues that you make with regard to NPCA. As I said before, should a matter come before me that involves the organization, I would approach the appropriate ethics counselors within the department to determine what role I should take.
And in my final seconds, I just asked, Senator Manchin asked, and I didn't really hear a yes or no answer to his question of, do you support a carbon tax, yes or no?
Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time. Would you like me to?
Please do.
Senator, as I said in Senator Manchin's question, a carbon tax is not something that would come before me in a role as Secretary of the Interior. The President has made it clear that he is not pursuing an approach to carbon at this point, carbon tax. And if confirmed in the position, I will look forward to bringing my experience to bear, as I've said, on multiple uses of public lands and an all of the above energy strategy. And I would not be in a position to take a position, frankly, around this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague, Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have quite a few questions, but in respect for you and then the witness, I'll submit the great majority of those for written answers. I do have a couple questions. I'd like to discuss your business experience because I agree completely. When in the opening statement, you said that there is a need for business certainty. Businesses need to have certainty and stability when making long-term decisions. And as CEO of REI in 2009, you appeared with President Obama at the White House. The President touted REI as a model company that provides health care benefits to its part-time employees. And yet, 2 years later, after the President's health care law was passed, REI asked for and secured a special waiver exempting your employees from the annual benefit limits in the President's health care law. The spokesman for REI, Bethany Hawley at the time, said that the waivers allowed us, she said, to continue to cover these employees. The American people remember President Obama repeatedly promising that if you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. But it just seems, based on Bethany Hawley's comments, that if REI, under your leadership and your direction as CEO, had not requested the special waiver under the health care law, that those 1,100 REI low-wage seasonal part-time workers for which you were congratulated at the White House, many of those employees would have lost the health insurance that they have today. So I look at this and say that, REI clearly isn't the only entity that received a waiver from the health care law. The administration granted over 1,200 waivers to companies and to unions with the right connections so that they could avoid the negative impacts of the law. And I would assume you made that decision as a smart business decision because you knew the impacts were going to be dramatic of the health care law. Well, there are other laws that are supported by this administration that negatively impact American businesses, and there are folks that are looking for waivers for those, just like REI appropriately made the decision that said, we can't live under this health care law. One of those laws is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, which negatively impacts businesses trying to access federal public lands. But rather than expanding the waivers under NEPA for what is known as categorical exclusions, the administration has actually restricted the use of NEPA waivers, particularly for onshore oil and gas production. So, I look at this so you know firsthand how waivers can help businesses avoid the negative impacts of bad policy, and what you would do in terms of committing to help us get waivers for the NEPA categorical exclusions, because, and clearly, I think many people think REI made a smart business decision by asking for waivers, and it's just as important for jobs here that the NEPA exclusion be given as well. I'd be interested in your comments on that.
Thank you, Senator. As a doctor yourself, an orthopedic surgeon, you recognize the complexity of our healthcare system. I want to first address the facts around REI's situation with the Affordable Care Act. Number one, our full-time employee plan is fully compliant with the Affordable Care Act and always has been. We have never asked for a waiver nor been granted a waiver on that program. And in fact, it exceeds the federal standards because we cover all employees under that full-time plan if they work an average of 20 hours a week or more over a rolling 6-month period. The federal standard is 30 hours. But we have a lot of employees. You referenced 1,100. Those are the numbers that chose to sign up for a part-time plan, because these are people that had no possibility of coverage under any other plan that was affordable to them. They're part-time, they're working perhaps multiple jobs, and that plan has a $10,000 annual cap. We are coming up on 2014. We will be working to replace that plan with the exchange program so that these part-time employees have an opportunity to have health care. So as they come into hospitals and work with your colleagues from the medical community, you'll get paid for what's done, and that's what REI did with its plan. So the waiver was strictly for the part-time plan.
For the plan, the waiver was for the people that you were praised at the White House for covering and weren't able to be covering under the health care law, which is why you applied to the waiver. But the question had to do with NEPA and the waiver there.
Yes. Well, the waiver was because we had a $10,000 annual cap on that part-time plan, which was the only way we could make it affordable. It was completely optional for us to cover those part-time employees.
But you received praise from the White House for doing something, and the White House said one thing, praised you for it, and then passed policy that made it very difficult for you to continue to do what you had been doing and receive praise for it. The question, though, is the categorical exclusion under NEPA.
Senator, I know NEPA is a law passed by this body. I know that it will be my obligation to use NEPA in the work that I do within the Department of the Interior. I'm not familiar with the details around exclusions or an exclusionary process or how that might impact businesses, but I would submit that the facts that I provided around the health care are what I'm familiar with. So I wanted
and you're familiar with the advantage, the need for certainty, which you mentioned in your opening statement, and people looking for certainty in so many areas, but there's so much uncertainty that it's very, very difficult to make decisions. And I think I'm just asking that you take a look at these as opportunities to allow people to continue keeping people working in this country and not forcing people out of work. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.